A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 78. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. How's it going, John?
It's going pretty well.
Is it? Yeah. You ready to talk about some Star Wars? Let's
this do week? It. Star Wars.
All the stuff.
Oh, I had a little song I was going to sing, and now I can't remember what it was.
Oh, come on.
I thought of it like 2 days ago, and then I thought about other things, as one does.
You got to start thinking about theme songs, man, because it's like when we get to episode, I think we should change the theme song at episode 100.
All right.
But I don't have any good ideas because,
yeah,
all the good ones have been used up. And I can't play the Star Wars theme on any instruments.
Mm-hmm.
I could, but it would take years of practice that we don't have.
Yeah.
But we do have weeks.
Not even a kazoo.
Oh, I could do that, but I bet you anything there's a Star Wars podcast with a kazoo theme. Or we might just keep it as is. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. It's just a theme song. I was just thinking about... I did spend about 10 minutes trying to learn the opening guitar lick of the Three's Company theme.
Uh-huh.
And then I realized that, I need to get on with learning more. I'm like, I've never learned how the stock market works, but I'm working on that Three's Company theme. I need to get my priorities in order, is my point. But
Three's Company too.
Exactly. It's like it's got that. It's the auto wah, I guess, is the effect.
Yeah.
Very 70s. But that speaking of 70s, let's get it back to Star Wars. Do you know what today is? The 8th of March, for people who are liling to this on a different
March
day.
the 8th be with you, everyone.
March the 8th. March the 8th, I read this on Twitter, so I'll credit to Twitter, and I don't remember who tweeted it. Yes. But today is the 40th anniversary of the publishing of the first issue of the Marvel Star Wars comic, which I think the first 6 issues were an adaptation of, obviously, A New Hope, or just Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say implore, but I don't really think the word implore works with our show.
Please, everyone.
I just want, please, if there's one thing you can do today of all days. No,
there's any goodness left in your hearts.
Yes, exactly. I would say that if you have not ever taken a spin through the Marvel adaptation of Star Wars, I'm sure it's up on Marvel Unlimited, and I'm sure you can get a free trial month or whatever. It's definitely interesting. I would say with a lot of things that it was obviously put together way before the movie was even done being filmed. Or a lot of the special effects. So it's a combination of scenes that were drawn from scripts and pictures, or what do you call it? What's the little pictures they do before they're figuring out shots? I'm completely blanking on the word. Doesn't that make any sense? The storyboards. Thank you. God.
Sorry, my mic was on mute and I didn't realize I've been sitting here saying storyboards for 40 seconds. Storyboards.
Yeah, I know.
Stay on target. Storyboards.
Exactly. Well, oh, sorry. Everything's beeping. I thought I was ready to do this show, and I guess I'm not.
I don't hear any beeping.
Okay.
All I hear is storyboards.
Yes. Or well, you know what it was? In my brain, I was thinking of the fact that, they talked a lot about the movie Ridley Scott's Alien and the storyboards for that and the storyboards for Blade Runner, because he drew a lot of the storyboards himself, but he doesn't call them storyboards. He calls them Ridleygrams.
That's right.
And I just thought in my brain, like, every time I think of it, I'm just thinking Ridleygrams. And I'm like, I'm not going to say Ridleygrams. I'm going to say, find out.
Look for it in the cereal aisle.
Exactly. I did them all myself. Anyway, there's, my point is about the Marvel thing. It's kind of great because it's almost an impressionistic take on the movie. The covers are great. It's like one of those things that when they, at least in my generation of comics, you would always guarantee the cover to have absolutely no relation to the story, where you're just like, yeah, that's never going to happen in this comic. It's like, the Death Star is actually blowing the planet in half, and it's like, we got to get out of here. We're all going to die. And obviously it doesn't happen, but it's a great comic. And I just remember it kind of being, you're looking at it and it's almost like Darth Vader almost looks different in every panel. It's definitely a throwback to, even now, if you realize, well, like, hey, it's March. Well, didn't Star Wars not come out until May? It's like, yeah, the book was out for 6 months. The comic had come out 2 months early. So it's kind of like back in the day when there was no anticipation for it, they could do things like that. Now, without spoiling it for you, there was a Disney shareholders meeting with Bob Iger, and he was
in Shanghai.
Was it in Shanghai? Nice.
I thought I saw the word Shanghai being thrown around.
So they
it seems like the kind of place you would take your shareholders for a board meeting.
Exactly. I hear it's a great town, and Jan Wen is from Shanghai. Mm-hmm. I just got I just ordered finally got a Baze Malbus in stock at Amazon, so it's going to be here next week. I'm very excited.
Congratulations.
Yes, I know. Exciting. So anyway, they I guess Bob Iger, to get the stockholders or the film exhibitors, maybe China's film exhibitors or whatever, they did a presentation, and I guess some footage was shown. I will not spoil it because it is all over the internet. And John, I think he's trying to stay spoiler free, but I will say that it's kind of funny how we go from it's all out there to being like just even a little thread. It's like people are jumping all over. It's all over Twitter right now.
Yeah,
people are being pretty liberal spoilery about it. I kind of even because I was going to makingstarwars.net just to kind of pick up on the last minute news, and the site kept on blanking out. So I was like, I thought my computer had gone down, but it turned out it was just so many people were going to that site. But I'll give them full credit. You can go over that makingstarwars.net, and if you want to get spoiled, but we are still like 280 days away, I think, from The Last Jedi coming out anyway. So
I mean, I guess the first line, the first scene of the movie isn't really a spoiler in most cases, right?
It's hard. It's hard what counts as spoilers now.
Yeah,
a lot of people go
at the same time. If you end on a cliffhanger, as Episode 7 did, and then say, "Oh, we're going to start right after that cliffhanger," that it kind of becomes a spoiler, Yeah,
they did kind of like. I find that interesting that in retrospect, now that the big thing when Rian Johnson, did the Episode 8 and that video of them approaching the island and Luke kind of looking furrowed, and finding out that was a recreation of the shot from Skellig Michael in 2014 when they filmed it originally. To realize that they're recreating it. Of course, then again, you never know. They might be. I'm not as trusting as I used to be about when I'm seeing things that they're actually things I'm going to be seeing in the movie. I guess my point is that having Rogue One kind of thing, even when The Force Awakens have definitely played around with our expectations a little bit. I wonder if it seems kind of foolhardy that they would go to all the trouble of going to Skellig Michael to reshoot a scene just to throw up kind of a red herring, but you never know. I mean, we've, other than little dribs and drabs of depictions of clothing and some cameos, there hasn't been a lot of. I don't feel like there's been a lot of info leaked so far. Not that be honest, I'm not looking for it as diligently as some people might, because I do kind of not want to get spoiled, but I'm all right with minor stuff. But I think Celebration, which is next month, I think we're going to get some. I think we're pretty much guaranteed a behind the scenes thing. Yeah. I just wonder if and that's where we'll get to start to see some of the costumes and creatures and all that kind of stuff. So that, again, that won't really be a spoiler kind of thing, but that'll be the first time we get a sense of what the movie will look like. Yeah, I'm wondering if what they're showing in Shanghai or whatever is what we're going to see at Celebration. Yeah, that could be. It makes me wonder, because it kind of people are saying it's it shows a little bit of action, it shows a tiny bit of dialogue and some action, and it shows some planets. And they said, but it gave a kind of the person kind of said, oh, it's it looks very classic Star Wars. It's expansive, it's exotic. So, hopefully, I would prefer, like I said, I was willing to consider Adam Driver's suggestion of having no trailer, really, but obviously that's not going to happen. But and I can't bring myself to avoid them if they're going to have them, so I'm going to watch them. So I would like them to kind of do a teaser, but again, we are at a, what do they call it, accelerated timeline now. I mean, if people have done the lineups of by this time we'd already seen this much of The Force Awakens, and we've seen zero. But I think that at this clip, you can't line it up the same way. Anyway, what my point is. Right. Let's move on. Well, so you went to your own convention this weekend, the Emerald City Comic-Con. Yes, that's right. Robert Con. You get to see all of this up close. Yeah. Yes, I did go to I did get to stand in line for an hour to ask questions. Just I'm really grumpy about it. Here, give me your $40. No, pictures are extra. Yes, I went to. So you went to Emerald City Comic Con. Yes, you purchased a disturbing image. Yes, for display in your home or office. You could find a picture of it on our Twitter. It's basically I guess I don't know what's happening with the arms. Super deformed, I think, is the term. Is the Japanese toys, they would call them you go buy them and the perspectives are strange. They would call them super deformed. Yeah, and it's basically a super deformed C-3PO with long, almost bow-like arms, holding. Those watches you buy where they it. You don't. There's not a strap that you have to undo and redo. You just it's kind of stretchy, and you just expand it to put it on your arm. That's what his arms are now, and he's super bulky up top. He's been doing push-ups, and he's cradling an Ewok in each arm, and it's just I don't his the upper body and the arms and the look on everyone's face in the photo. It's not a photo, but the image. It's. Yeah, I don't know what this is. No, and I think that's kind of where the impetus between me purchasing it. It's I mean, it's hilarious, but it's also a little disturbing. I don't, obviously, other than Star Wars comics, I don't read a lot of comics, so I wasn't going to buy comics, and I just kind of was looking for Star Wars stuff, and of course, oh my lord, everything that was toys were, convention prices, and I'm not, it's 3 times the normal going rate for stuff, and I'm just I'm not going to buy that. So I actually saw this out of the corner of my eye and bought it, and then found out that the people selling it could barely remember the name of the artist who did it. So I unfortunately not going to be able to even. I still haven't figured out, because I went and Googled the guy's name and nothing came up. So I've done everything. I've Googled C-3PO garland, because the Ewoks are putting a garland on him in it's almost kind of done in the I'm no expert on I think his name's Miyazaki, the guy that did Spirited Away and My Neighbor. Miyazaki. It kind of is done in that kind of style, I think. I'm no expert, but I was like, I like stuff like that sometimes. I have also in my collection, I have like an R2-D2 drawing that's him on the Tantive 4 that I found it at Goodwill. It looks like it was just done like as a high school student, just drew it, and then somehow it ended up in a thrift store.
Yeah,
that's the kind of stuff. It's like you can't. It's almost got that what do you call it, handmade quality to it that you're like that Lucasfilm isn't really pushing forward, because obviously when a company is selling Force Awakens branded T-balls, it's like to put your loose leaf tees in. It's like they're not really coming up with a lot of original artwork. It's usually just that same Kylo Ren mask thing, and we've already seen the boxes for the Last Jedi. It's very standard. It's going to be on everything. So anytime I can come across something a little bit different, unlicensed, that simultaneously is unlicensed and interesting, I'll pick it up. So. But yeah, I went to Comic-Con. It was super busy, super packed. We actually went on a Friday, which is actually considered one of the slower days, but by no means was it slow. I remember when it was held in a kind of a small hall and you could just kind of like saunter around from table to table. Now it's like you're going to have to like make yourself as small as possible and drink a lot of water. Otherwise you're going to get overwhelmed. But my big takeaway is I went to Del Rey, had a panel for author Timothy Zahn, came out and talked a little bit about Thrawn that's coming out next month. I would say that the big takeaway is like he talked a little bit. I had a question I was going to ask him, but the thing is, like, he basically answered the question himself, or
there you go.
It came up, so I didn't even have to bother the guy. But the point is that so he talked a little bit about the process of him finding out that Thrawn was coming to Rebel Season 3, and the thing that he wanted to make sure people understood is that any connection that he has to Lucasfilm is really kind of at their pleasure. Kind of, he doesn't own any of those things. He doesn't own Thrawn. He doesn't own Pelion. I don't even think he didn't really talk about this. I assume he doesn't even get residuals from works that he didn't write. I mean, you could go a whole conversation about, how little that people that do these tie-in novels actually make from it. They're not just because, he wrote this, beloved trilogy doesn't mean that he's like set for life. He is a working writer. He writes in a couple different, he has his own books that he writes. He also does StarCraft, which I think is based off of a PC game that's quite, has a very dedicated following. So he writes a lot of different stuff. So they called him and said, hey, you want to come for a meeting? And it was that kind of thing where he slowly by the way they kind of conducted the him going to Lucasfilm and then being kind of secretive about it, he was like, "Ooh, something's coming up. I might be getting a new book," and it really did come up the end that they were telling him, like, we're bringing Thrawn to Rebels and we want you to do a book. So it's so it was kind of interesting to kind of get an idea of what about how he views the character, because I was wondering, well, this is his chance to kind of redo the character, and I was going to ask him, is like, is there anything about Thrawn that you maybe in retrospect didn't enjoy and you wanted to maybe kind of quote fix? But really the big takeaway from this panel was that he doesn't see a distinction between the Thrawn that he wrote back in the 90s and the Thrawn that is on Rebels. He basically is that kind of thing where, the EU isn't wiped away until they explicitly say it is. So it's kind of like, I would consider that in a way that they're parallel Thrawns, but he just thinks of it as one Thrawn. So the Thrawn that you're seeing even though he's not writing the character, and I don't think he never made any inference that he actually, aside from getting this book that he's done, that he had any influence on how Filoni and crew have depicted, or I mean, they did work in concert. Like, say, I guess there's a sequence, you know, in Through Imperial Eyes where he does the kind of, you know, he does the karate stuff with the robots, that he put in a scene in this Thrawn book where it's him training, so it kind of sets it up that he's done martial arts and whatnot. But yeah, generally he kind of has a I don't think that he really wants to give up on the idea that his original trilogy is not canon anymore. I know that's not a criticism; it's just kind of my takeaway. That, excuse me,
right? Well, I mean, it's. I think I can't remember if you or someone else who was there at the panel saying he's like, oh, I would love to write a sequel, or I'm already planning for a sequel. So, I mean, I think, yeah, with these authors, it's tricky who have written, you know, these EU characters, and maybe even particularly him, who has two characters in particular who became so popular, where it's, you know, he wants to see those characters continue. You know, I'm sure he likes those characters because he kept writing for them. And so, you know, the idea that they would just be swept away, and, you know, you could look at it as, in one sense, of like, you know, his checks cleared years ago. He's still getting residuals from those books, you know, whenever they get sold. You know, I'm sure they're still selling a little bit. So, you know, what's the big deal? But at the same time, you know, as writers, especially if you write a series of books using the same characters over and over, right? And Thrawn showed up in other books, and Mara Jade showed up in other books that Thrawn wrote, that Zahn wrote. You know, you as a writer, you either kind of grow to love or hate your characters. You know, you feel a certain way about these characters that you keep writing for. And so for him, at least with Thrawn, it sounds like, yeah, you know, I don't know that he wants to write Thrawn novels forever, because, you know, he certainly moved away from those before anyway. But I think he also, you know, he likes that character enough, and, you know, if they want to keep paying him to write Thrawn novels, he's happy to keep doing it. So, and you know, it would be hard, I think, for the writers to say, oh, well, there's two different versions of this character, right? Because at least in their minds, they're kind of involved in shaping who that character is and what their background is and motivations and what they've done in their lives. And so, you know, for him to say like, well, we're going to sweep all of that away, or, you know, the vast majority of that away, and just kind of start from scratch, I don't think that would be appealing either, right? And so, yeah, it makes sense to me that he would think, no, it's the same. It's not that they're parallel Thrawns necessarily. It's just, it's the same character. We are just hearing different stories about him now than were told 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of, you know, again, that's my preferred way of it anyway, that I'm not super jazzed about this having a rigid continuum where someone could just pick up a book and go, you know, where was this character, you know, in relation to Rogue One? Where were they? What planet were they on? What was their rank? I mean, it's fun that people go out and do that, but again, it's like, I'm still a fan of, the idea that, like, some of the stuff in the, Dark Empire or whatever comics gets kind of contradicted in this comic and whatever. But, you know, it's enough where they don't conflict so much that it completely ruins it. And, you know, and I think maybe Thrawn is kind of in that idea too, which is beneficial to him. I know some people kind of, you know, some people got up and asked some questions, and it was kind of funny though, because it got to be like a little interesting about how, you know, Zahn is really kind of no more than anybody, even though there's been like, James Luceno and Christy Golden, and a lot of different authors have written multiple, Alexander Freed or whatever. They've written multiple Star Wars books, but he's kind of still viewed as like kind of the gold standard Star Wars author. And people were like kind of throwing, some shade on, Kevin J. Anderson when they're asking questions.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously, Zahn is
I've done that.
He wouldn't do that to somebody, or I don't know. Has he thrown shade on? Oh, you've
no,
done.
But I have.
You have, and so have I. But he kind of, he was diplomatic and didn't rise up to it because he's a professional. But it was kind of like, people are very passionate about the way he writes Star Wars, and that old thing like, talking about people really want him to be in the movies in some way, shape, or form, and like they really wanted. They really want, somebody said Benedict Cumberbatch, which, everybody says Benedict Cumberbatch every time you need some stiff dude, which I just saw, Doctor Strange over the weekend. And
I see stare.
It's like, geez, boy. Have you seen Doctor Strange?
I have not.
Maybe I'm just out of sync with Rotten Tomatoes, but it's like, I did not enjoy that movie at all. I thought it was terrible. Like, there was humor in it. That like, I don't know, I'm not super familiar with that comic. I always kind of, when it came out, it was kind of, he looked like a cheap 70s magician, and that, that was pretty much like, I don't really want to read a comic book about Doug Henning, so it never really, and it's like, and I don't know what it is about, and I guess my point is that I do not see Cumberbatch being a guy that could play Thrawn any more than I could see him play Khan, which he already did. I mean, and he plays Doctor Strange, and now I don't know. Maybe haven't read since I haven't read the comic, but I didn't know that Doctor Strange was kind of a D-bag. It's just like he plays him as like this, complete jackass. Which then when I found out that, like, I was reading the IMDb that, like, I'm not going to talk about throwing shade, but I guess I'm going to do it. That I guess Dan Harmon was hired to, like, do a joke polish or something on the script, which is so obvious because
should have hired Doc Hammer.
I'm not a fan of Dan Harmon's comedy writing, so it's obviously like, it's just, I should have known. I could have guessed. I was like, God, what's all these really terrible jokes? Oh, it's the guy that brought us Community. Yeah, it's pretty. Anyway, sorry.
They should have hired Doc Hammer instead.
Exactly. I did see a. Does Doc Hammer do the voice of Dr. Girlfriend?
Yes.
I saw a very convincing Dr. Girlfriend at the Comic-Con. But so anyway, enough throwing shade on people, but well, for this minute, I guess Zahn, if he could cast Thrawn, it would have been Jeremy Irons, which I think is actually pretty good. I mean, he might be a little too old. Do we know how old Thrawn was? I guess Zahn maybe has an idea in his mind, but I don't know. I mean, I guess, we know he would do it. But that's Jeremy Irons is like one of those guys where he'll be like, sometimes he'll be the best thing in a bad thing, and sometimes he'll be the worst thing in the worst thing. It's like, I kind of want to. I bought these DVDs used because I like to have like little mini film festivals at my house on the weekend. Which by film festival, I mean it's me and my wife watching a movie. But I like to get a thematic thing, and I've been holding on to this for the right occasion. Which I'm going to have the Jeremy Irons Just Doing It for the Money Fest, which is Dungeons and Dragons, the movie he did with. I don't even know of anybody of note that was in it. Thora Birch and Marlon Wayans, I think, is in it. And then Marlon
Wayans is in it.
Yes. And he also did that, I think the same year, within the same 18-month period, he also did the Guy Pearce, the Time Machine with Guy Pearce and Samantha Mumba. And it was like this supposed to be like this. It was going to, I don't know. They were trying to set it up as this big, like, everybody's going to love H.G. Wells' Time Machine or whatever. But it flopped, and he plays like the head, Jeremy Irons plays the head Morlock. So it's kind of like, I kind of wanted, it's like, eventually, I guess my point is that yeah, he just because he would do it wouldn't necessarily mean it would be good. It's just
right.
I think he'll do the cheap sci-fi movies, and he'll be in Batman v Superman. And I don't think he's particularly worried about that. But in an interesting take, and usually I find when authors like talk about how they would cast things, it's never the person who ends up playing it. It's like it almost seems like almost by design. You know what I mean? It's like once unless the author is writing the script and casting the movie, it's going to be somebody very different than what the author wants. But that's they're involved in their characters, so they're obviously very passionate.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was basically all my Star Wars related fun at Comic-Con. So yeah, I kind of wish that Tim had taken a minute and done like a reading or something, but I did. Del Rey was nice enough to be handing out samplers of some of their 2016, 2017 slate. So I guess there's a little excerpt from Thrawn, but I might just, it's only like 4 pages.
Someone posted an excerpt from Thrawn online last week, maybe?
Yeah, he says that this is actually longer, but it's not very long, but I didn't even realize it until
USA Today, that's who did it.
Yeah, he said it's slightly longer than the excerpt on USA Today, but unfortunately, I haven't had time to read the 4 pages before. But
right.
But I assume we're both going to read that one, and we'll give you a full review on that one.
Yep. Anything else? You hear anything about video games or?
Well, I know that Battlefront 2 is going to be shown at. I think it's EA is doing a presentation at Celebration of all things. So technically, these kind of things usually get shown at E3, which is the Electronics Expo, which this year is a little different because it's actually open to the public. And then usually it's like a whole week. But slowly but surely they've been moving these things to the weekends. So it's kind of like that whole thing's changing. But I think EA is going to be showing their Battlefront 2. I'm cautiously excited or interested. I was very disappointed about the way the game was kind of put out. It was like basically, and I won't repeat this because I've done it. I honestly felt like I bought half a game and I spent $60 and I had to spend another $50 to get the other half of the game. And by that time, it was like gameplay was kind of, I don't know, compared to a lot of other games in that genre, it just seemed very limited. And I'm really hoping that Battlefront 2 is going to rectify. I know that there's going to be the single player which is mode, which is important. I think it's I don't think it's essential, but I think it's important for people to when you have a big AAA title like this, a lot of different people from a lot of different levels of engagement. I mean, some people don't have, reliable internet. That's one of the big problems with video gaming in the 21st century is that, all the big companies assume that you're constantly connected to this, lightning fast internet, where it's like in a lot of rural areas or whatever, it's like if you don't have Comcast or whatever, and you're just dealing with whatever local internet company, sometimes the speeds aren't very good and you can be disconnected a lot and blah, blah, blah. And I think, having a first person thing is a good thing for this. It adds a value. I know that they're going to do a little bit more saga jumping, I guess would be the term, where they're going to have, it's not just going to be stuff from the original trilogy, which, they even kind of broke that later on with the Scarif pack at the end. But by that time, I feel like the game had already kind of, its lifespan had already kind of died out. Although people are, you go on Twitch, there's people playing it constantly. I guess maybe I just didn't dedicate enough time to really become good at it. So now you go on there and you just get wasted. But yeah. I'm hoping, because, Battlefront 2 for the original Xbox was actually a much greater expansion of the franchise, and you could jump around and play the Galactic, they call it the Galactic Civil War, and then you could go back to the Clone Wars. So maybe a little bit more of an arcadey kind of thing. I don't think that the fundamental gameplay is going to change. and that might be a problem for me, at least. I mean, I'm going to probably buy it because I'm a sucker for any kind of Star Wars gaming. I actually bought recently for Pinball FX, which is kind of a console type pinball game. I spent $5 to buy the Rogue One pinball table, which is like, you hit certain things and then Orson Krennic comes out and says like, this power, so it says some goofy thing, and it's barely a Star Wars reference in it. It's just like you're basically, like there's a character standing on the table, and occasionally if you hit the thing, they do a little animation and then go back to normal. So
yeah.
So if I'll spend money on that, I'll probably, with the right amount of pre-order bonuses and stuff like that, I'll probably end up buying Battlefront 2 as well.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting to me about Battlefront 2, or at least thinking about it, is, I mean, I think they've said, or at least hinted, not so, or said in not so many words, that, Battlefront 2 is going to have some maps from the newer movies, or I would imagine specifically The Last Jedi. But I don't know what, they can't reveal too much of that before the movie comes out. So when they start showing off the game at Celebration or E3 or wherever else, I mean, I wonder what other maps are they going to put on there? Like what haven't they done yet from the original trilogy? Or I guess even, I mean, because they've done Scarif, they've done from Rogue One, they've done Jakku from The Force Awakens. I'm not sure what else there is for them to do. I guess they could do a Takadano. Did they do Takadano already?
No.
I guess they could do that, or Edu, or Jeddah maybe. But those the parts that those planets played in the movie feel like they lend themselves less to a Battlefront type thing than others. It's so,
yeah.
I guess what else are they going to put in this game, knowing that they can't really reveal too much of the Last Jedi related content. So that's what I'm kind of interested to see, is like, all right, how do they get creative and like find new maps to put out there?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what happened is with the game itself. Is like when you play Endor, you're not really playing a familiar part of Endor. It's like they kind of like they recreate it from scratch, and like Tatooine is like you're not playing anywhere near Mos Eisley, but it's like they recreate stuff like, okay, well, there's a house that's very similar to the Lars homestead, like those houses that look like kind of a bubble. Mm-hmm. And then you go down and you find out, oh, well, then you go down this hallway and it takes you to a landing bay, which is very much looks like the Mos Eisley landing bay, but it's not. And the Millennium Falcon is there. So I think they're kind of, what they do is I think they kind of even though like I would say that Hoth, the base on Hoth, is actually very close to the way it's depicted in the movie, the geography of it, but you can walk around the health bays and some of the stuff. So it kind of looks like the movie more so than anything else. So I feel like they kind of, you could do like, oh, it's Edu, but it's going to be like, it'll be the interior of the facility, or it'll be, Jeddah, but it might be, it'll be the city of Jeddah, but without all the people, because they don't have a lot of, these games they don't have a non-playing characters in them, so it'll just be kind of empty. I mean, obviously I don't know, but they would just kind of reinterpret it and kind of be like.
And I guess they could create new ones, right? Because in the original release they had Sullust, which wasn't right. It's like based on anything from the movies, other than it was mentioned once. There was one line that mentioned the planet Sullust in Return of the Jedi, but they still, managed to create that world. So I guess we could see them create new planets, which, I mean, that would be kind of interesting too, I think. And then, see how they integrate those into the Star Wars lore.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's that level design is so important to get it, get it to look like Star Wars, and make it interesting. So it's not just, the other game that DICE makes, which is the Battlefield series, and it's Battlefield 1, which is this World War I type game, they have these huge expansive maps, and I had been lamenting in Battlefield, like, why isn't it more like that game where these huge maps? Well, to be honest, like some of the maps on this Battlefield 1, they become unwieldy large, and like you can actually go out and get kind of pushed out in the corner and like, actually run into anybody to fight. And I think they have to strike a balance, again, just to reiterate, Battlefront is a much more arcade-ish kind of thing where it's like you're dying very quickly, and it's just kind of like you're kind of expected to, there's not a lot of finessing and not a lot of customization, whereas like Battlefield and Call of Duty, you can add like, oh, I'm gonna add this to my gun, or I'm gonna add this. I mean, there's a little bit of that, but not to the grand extent that a lot of those games are known for. So I would hope for a little bit more customization, but when they're promoting a title like this, they do need to appeal to a wide range of gamers rather than like people that play first person shooters. So like I said, I don't expect them to really reinvent the wheel with this. I can always hope that they will, but I'm really looking forward to that Amy Hennig game whatever she's gonna more than anything, because I've been playing a lot of RPGs, which is I think I'm like the last guy who plays video games to actually play Skyrim, and I think I've talked about this before, but it's like every time I'm like playing this, I'm thinking like, why isn't there something like this for Star Wars, where it's like you go to different planets and you can fly and you can run tasks and you can build a character over time. It's there's definitely a I think there's definitely a place out there for something like that, but it takes so long to develop these games.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a Celebration poster. Speaking of Celebration, what'd you take away from your post? It's
so there are going to be some there are going to be some exclusives available to attendees of Celebration. In fact, today they announced there are going to be some exclusive droid figures.
Yeah, I saw that.
So if you want BT or 000 or like R5, you can get those. But a while back, I guess a week or two ago, they announced there were going to be these special posters and character artwork that are going to be there. And the main poster takes in all the characters that we've seen so far from all from all 7 of the episode numbers, right? So you have, Darth Vader and the Death Star, but then, and, Han and Leia and Luke and Chewie and Yoda. Then you have Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan. You have, Natalie Portman is in it. Anakin Skywalker, the prequel version, the episode 2, episode 3 version of Anakin Skywalker. You have Rey and Finn and Poe. You have Hux and Kylo Ren and Captain Phasma. You have C-3PO, R2-D2, BB-8, and then down at the bottom on the left, you have the stormtroopers looking for the droids in episode 4, and on the right you have Luke and Obi-Wan in that speeder, and then on the right you have Rey with her little speeder on Jakku, which is of course basically Luke's land speeder turned on its side.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of a neat, visual reference or acknowledgement that that's kind of where they got that design from. I didn't see who did these posters. I mean, in general, and so in addition to that big one, then they have posters of individual characters. So if you want one of just Luke from the end of episode 7, or just Kylo Ren, or even Rebels characters. So Ezra, Kanan, Sabine, Hera, Zeb, Thrawn. There's one of Jyn Erso, but I think she's the only Rogue One character who gets their poster. I don't see any individual character posters for Han or Leia or Obi-Wan or Yoda. But the other notable thing is that they're not in color. They're in, kind of, I don't know if this is like ink wash or what this is, but blacks and grays and kind of beige So some of these I think look really good. Some of them I think look a little too plain. Like the one of Finn is a little plain. The one of Luke from Episode 7 is a little plain. Obviously with Sabine, her character is so associated with, these really vivid colors and patterns. And so without those, it's kind of an odd look. But, I think the one with Thrawn looks pretty good. The one with Zeb looks pretty good. The big one with all the different characters, it looks fine. Again, I think I would have liked maybe a different color scheme. I get kind of the minimalist approach here, and I think that could work, but it also, I think it just, some of it tends to be too understated. That's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, it's kind of the poster overall is it definitely isn't something I would want in my collection. It's it's kind of okay. So this is at least my takeaway is okay. This is a Star Wars celebration, so celebration of everything Star Wars. So yeah, I find it really strange about how Hayden Christensen is in this when it's like prequel hate is kind of at an all-time low in the fandom, but
right.
It's definitely not a thing where like people are necessarily like, I really want more of that. Hux. I mean, really, there's a Hux, but no Snoke. It's kind of strange. And like Rey is like, okay, so Rey is in here twice, but there's nothing from Rogue One. There's
right.
nothing.
There's no Emperor.
Yeah, there's no Emperor.
And
technically it's Anakin's there twice. You don't actually need him. Is there? Oh, there's no Obi-Wan, is there? Oh no,
there's the Ewan McGregor,
the Ewan McGregor one, and it's like, okay, well, again, the Rey is kind of doesn't really look like Daisy Ridley. The Oscar Isaac, I mean, he's wearing a helmet. You don't even see his face in it. So it's kind of like, I find that a little strange. And it's like, just the composition's a little odd. It's, the droids, they're not front and center, but they're the low center, but I feel like they kind of look like they're about, 30% smaller than they should be or something.
Yeah, they're kind of off on their own down there.
I almost wonder, and it's like, I don't see like obviously I'm looking at, there's a one little symbol, looks like a triangle. That might be a signature of an artist, but it makes me wonder, it's like, was this drawn, or is this like one of those things where they took pre-existing shots and made a Photoshop and then applied a filter to it?
That very well could be.
It's kind of like, and the Millennium Falcon kind of going off horizontally off of Chewbacca. It's kind of like, it's kind of like poorly defined, where the cockpit is almost rounded off into just overall, it's, in the individual things, it's like they kind of look like those sketches that you go, like, again, I just came back from the convention. It's like, you go to these booths and there's like artists, dozens and dozens of artists, and they're all drawing, like whatever's popular. And a lot of it is this right now is Star Wars. So I'm seeing, here's my Rey, here's my Finn, here's my Phasma. They all kind of look like they should be kind of, hung up with a paper clip on a piece of string at somebody's booth, I mean, I'm sounding a little dickish saying that, but they don't look like super professional. They look like rough sketches. And again, when you're doing I find it kind of a little strange that why they don't try to maybe do, a more realistic depiction of, say, the Rebels characters. I mean, that's what they're doing with the Black Series figures. They do the Kanan looks, like a person, and the Sabine looks like a real person. They're not figures of the cartoon. They tried to do them kind of a realistic thing, and I don't know, maybe that's because they were just like, they don't want to have people, they don't want to confuse people or whatnot. But I mean, I guess these things they're only meant to really, be for that week. So it's not like, oh, this is the new 40th anniversary logo for Star Wars. Although I'm not a huge fan of that. Have you seen that 40th anniversary logo stamp that they've been putting out?
I don't know that I have.
It's just an outline of the Luke holding his lightsaber up with Leia in front of him. It's on the toy thing, and it's people have really, I must be in the minority that people are like, oh, I think it's really great. I really love that image, and I was just kind of underwhelmed by it. But it's not. It's only supposed to be a stamp that goes on everything, so it's not. Maybe it's only supposed to be kind of subtle, but yeah, I'm not. This wouldn't be something that I would be like, oh man, pick me up one of those or whatnot. I not quirky enough. I mean, and like that one at the bottom, there's like just a dewback there. It's like, really? It's just
right. I guess that's because that's from the, the special editions, which is the official version of the movie now.
Right, but you could, they could have. I mean, if we're doing all these things, like, could have had, at that size, the scale, which we're talking, it's super small. Could have had all the bounty hunters. There's no Lando. Yeah. There's no Cloud City. Well,
especially then when you get to on the other side, there's the crashed Star Destroyer behind Rey. The scale on those, that is an enormous dewback.
Right.
When you compare it to the Star Destroyer. Yeah, I mean, I think, overall, it just seems like it's unfinished.
Yeah.
Like, they got halfway through doing it, and we're like, man, I think people will buy that, and just stopped working on it.
Yeah.
Is kind of the sense I get from looking at this.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, in the lack of color, it really, I mean, if you have Sabine, you want to see her hair, you want to see her, her costuming, Thrawn, obviously he's got that blue skin you want to bring out, and I don't know, even like the Jyn Erso, she looks like she's waiting for a bus.
Yeah,
it's like, I'm just waiting.
Right, she's just like standing.
Yeah, I'm just standing around waiting for the bus, and Luke looks like
her and old Luke.
Actually, old Luke, you know what he looks like? He looks like he's reading the menu at McDonald's. He's like,
let's see, I'll have a
Well, have you been to a McDonald's recently?
No.
So everything is like, because I go there for coffee.
Is it just pictures now?
Well, it's all LCD screens, and this is like, and so because it's set up for kids, they flash like you only see them for like 2 seconds. So you'll be like, yeah, I want a number, and then it changes to something else. And like, what the fuck? I gotta wait for, pardon me. You gotta wait for it to cycle back through so you can see like, yeah, I want a coffee and a hash brown. It's like, I guess maybe that's more telling. It's like, yeah, Luke looks like me looking at the menu at McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
So take what you will from that.
Yeah.
But I give this a thumbs down. I give it a thumbs down. But
yeah, it's unfortunate, but
I'm not going to Celebration, so
we're not going to Celebration, so
obviously I'm vote with my dollar.
Yeah. So another thing, or a thing, I should say, that Lucasfilm has apparently started doing that is interesting is that they have stopped using episode numbers in the official movie title. So this is in documentation and press releases. They've only been saying, Star Wars : A New Hope, or Star Wars : The Force Awakens, or Star Wars : Attack of the Clones, and not refer to them as episode 4, episode 7, or episode 2. And so people are speculating as to what this means. One of which is that, episode 9, is that going to be the real official end of this, Skywalker saga, the movies that are getting the episode numbers? Are we ever going to see an episode 10? Are we just going to get these kind of standalone, non-Skywalker related movies after 2019? All of that is speculation as to what they're deciding. It could just be a style change to avoid confusion between those movies and then like Rogue One or the Han Solo movie, and just make the point like, no, it's all Star Wars. But I mean, there's this question of how would you feel if episode 9 was the real official end of this Skywalker saga, and then from then on we just get what are now called the standalone movies that don't feature any of the the episode numbers. What if after 2019 it's just Star Wars, Rogue One, or Star Wars Han Solo does a thing, or Star Wars the Sebulba adventures. How would you feel about that?
How would I feel about it?
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. It's like I do kind of think Episode 9 is kind of the end of the focus on Skywalker, the Skywalker family, the Skywalker saga. The direct connection to that original movie. After 9, it's like when you get to 9 movies in a series, you do start to get to that point where when there's a what is it? The taxonomy or whatever they call it. You start to get really uncomfortable comparisons to things like the Friday the 13th series. Right. It's like these movies that like they're, when you get to the point, like how many Saw movies there were, it's like, I can't really think of another kind of movie that ever stuck with a number, a numbering thing that didn't end up almost kind of falling into an area of self-parody.
Right.
So Paramount, when they near the end of the original run of Star Trek movies, they had stopped kind of using numbers after 6. So they'd start direct motion picture, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. When they did they called it, the 7th one is Generations, and then they just kind of went with that kind of thing. I think it's smart for them to do it. I mean, in some ways it's kind of sad because again, it's another sign of how things have changed, and the focus is, I mean, I always have to remind myself, kids movies for kids. And it's like, I'm old now, and it's like they've already got me kind of, and so they need to get the new kids. So it's like, yeah, if the barrier for entry is like so hard for kids where they're like, it's like, well, if I start on episode 7, am I going to be completely confused? It's so, I think that the idea that even at the end of the day, it's like, if you can jump in on any Star Wars movie, and you can probably watch them in any order, and you get a lot of enjoyment out of it anyway. It's, right. It's the kind of, I was going to refer to this at the end, but one of our readers actually has been kind of sending me, we were talking about this on Twitter, and he had talked about how Andrew from Portland, who listens to the show, and I know him in real life, but he's been showing the original trilogy to a friend, and she'd only seen Rogue One, and he just kind of wanted to get her take, and she seemed confused by the idea of the Force in Rogue One, but then when she saw it in A New Hope, when Obi-Wan explains it made all sense, because I guess for her, Rogue One, it was kind of like implied that you would know what the Force is, and I never thought of it that way. But then she also got this thing where she immediately recognized Ponda Baba from the little Dr. Ezevon and Ponda Baba cameo in Rogue One. So that's that kind of thing where it's like, she'd already known about the Vader-Luke relationship. I'm just kind of paraphrasing from what he sent me. Anyway, she was already aware of that because pop culture, and everybody. Right. So it's like, yeah, you're never going to get that. But it's like, well, Star Wars is kind of that thing where, like, you could probably jump in wherever. It's like, I wouldn't tell actually, I'm stopping myself mid-sentence. I was like, well, I wouldn't tell a kid to, watch the Clone Wars and stuff. But, to be honest, I think, like my nieces, I think they've seen probably more of the cartoons or the books or whatever of the Clone Wars than they may have had of the original Star Wars movies. So I think that maybe it's smart for them. They don't ever want to create a situation where somebody, maybe, a 5-year-old or whatever, is looking at Star Wars and saying like, this is confusing. What number do I start with? It's like, well, do I have to start if I start with 1 and somebody's telling me like, oh, don't start with 1, start with 4. And there's all these theories of how you do it. But I think in going forward, Disney is probably just being like, it's all Star Wars, just jump in wherever. I'm sure they probably want you to jump in at whatever movies in theaters. But yeah, I don't know what their plans are in the future. I've had a conversation with somebody recently where, I brought up my thing I've said probably a dozen times on the show is like, with CGI getting so good in 20 years, we'll probably be seeing, movie versions of like what happened between Empire and Jedi and because they can CGI. But this guy made an interesting point is he says, in 20 years, people won't care that it's not Mark Hamill or Carrie Fisher.
Yeah.
It's like they can technically recast the role with live action, and it probably, as long as they kind of got like, we're already going to have to accept, Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo and Donald Glover as Lando. It's, we've had, they've changed stuff over time. It's like, Hayden Christensen's face over Sebastian Shaw's thing. Not that was that big of a deal for anybody but us old nerds, but
yeah,
it's, I think it's just that, I think it's an indicator in the fact that they're probably going to change their strategy. Financially, even speaking, having a trilogy is a major commitment to resources. And if, God forbid, Star Wars kind of falls out of favor. I mean, everybody complains about the prequels, but I don't think at the end of the day that people would say, oh, well, that was a bad, George wasted his money on these bad movies. They still did very respectably in theaters and in toys and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, again, episode numbers, it might be a liability for them. And if they can do whatever they want, they want to do a one-off and not have to commit to things like, a trilogy of movies about Jedi, and then they find out like the first one does so-so, and then the second one does terrible, and then they're like, we've already committed $150 million to the 12th Star Wars movie, and nobody cares. Much like the Divergent series that kind of had that problem where the first movie did well and the second movie did pretty good and
less well. So
they decided to split the third into two, and then the third, the first half of the third movie did so poorly that they still haven't officially announced a end to that trilogy.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa. I mean, obviously Divergent isn't Star Wars, but even things like Harry Potter and when they split those movies into two, or the Hunger Games, I mean, I think that's going to be a thing that like people are going to look back and go, boy, yeah, we don't do that anymore. Because I mean, I think didn't Marvel go back on their, like, there's the Infinity War, the Avengers Infinity War. Didn't they already go back and combine that Infinity War into one movie?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's still on the movie release schedule. I think it's still listed as part 1 and part 2.
Okay, maybe I thought maybe they had oh well, anyway, sorry, I'm getting a text.
I mean, maybe they did, and what I'm looking at just hasn't been updated, but
actually it says
2018
is just Avengers Infinity War. It's no longer a two-part thing, and that's what I was kind of thinking, where it's like, it's not that they don't have it's not like they don't think they have a good movie here. I just think that that they're probably thinking like, why risk it? Why risk it and splitting it? Let's just have like one really good movie. I mean, we've seen what's happened with the kind of the unnecessary extra movie that the Hobbit ended up with, which was because of a production issue where they kind of went into production. They had almost no pre-production when they went in that movie, and they had to go from scratch. But
yeah,
I mean, I don't know what the deal is with why the Avengers has been brought back to one movie, especially since it's going to be much like, which I think we're going to talk about next, is the Han Solo movie. The idea that it has a cast. If you look at this cast, it's like just the just the main cast is like almost 20 people.
Right.
And you're like, oh my God, how is there going to be any room for anyone in these movies?
Yeah. I mean, just real quickly before we move to the Han Solo movie, I mean, I think I agree that that episode 9 may be the last episode number we see for a while, in part because I mean, even the younger actors who are in these sequels, or excuse me, we're not supposed to call them the sequel trilogy anymore. Episode 7, 8, and 9. They're going to be at the point of their careers where they're probably going to want to go do other things, and they may not want to sign up for another 3 Star Wars movies, right? Adam Driver, I would imagine, certainly. He's not knowing anything about him, but he seems like someone who, he'll do these 3, and then he'll go start, doing more Noah Baumbach movies or something.
Exactly.
And Daisy Ridley, will probably be on to other things. John Boyega, I'm sure he would be happy to do Star Wars, but he's also taken on other projects, and he may want to move off and do other things. So, unless you want to start with a whole new storyline with Episode 10, and maybe that they decide that's the way to go, but at least right now they're saying that the episodes with the movies with episode numbers are the Skywalker saga. So unless you want to bring in a whole new cast to create a different branch off of that story. I think it's just they're just the people who would be in those movies are probably not going to be as interested, or at least they're starting to take other jobs, and they'll be in other things and finding the time to fit them in. They're not necessarily going to want to do Star Wars for the rest of their careers.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No. So yeah, Episode 9 could be the end of. That would not the end of Star Wars, obviously, because they're going to keep making these other things. But, that at least in movie form, that could be the last we hear of the Skywalkers for a while.
Right. Well, it does kind of bring up this question I keep thinking to myself about, Star Wars is a cultural phenomenon now that it's almost kind of like, I would never say that these movies aren't as crafted as the Lucas ones, but because if you see any of the behind the scenes thing, the dedication, but I guess my point is that as time goes on, they're going to start becoming less and less special. And that the idea where it's if an actor had an opportunity to be in a Star Wars movie, that would be a major coup for their, Force Awakens is a great example of that. It's like look at all the guys that the producer of the drummer of Radiohead or somebody, their producer, he's a stormtrooper. Daniel Craig is a stormtrooper. I mean, I hope this isn't a spoiler, but there has been talk that Thomas Hardy is actually going to be doing something similar in Episode 8. It's kind of an inconsequential. He's not a cast member. But my point is, when is this going to stop being special to people, and it's just going to be a thing where it's being cast, somebody being cast as Batman or Superman now it's so diminished now that it used to be a big deal. It's Chris Reeve is who's going to take, for a long time, Christopher Reeve was then Dean Cain. It's some people, then Tom Welling, and then Henry Cavill, and then you're all of a sudden it's not such a big deal. Now there's a Superman on the Supergirl TV, and I don't even know who it is, and it's it used to be an iconic thing to be a part of it. And I always wonder, it's I made a joke on Twitter, it's do you think that people that played stormtroopers in say, Rogue One kind of felt a little bit more cool than the guys that were in the Force Awakens, because you're First Order, you're the I trooper, it's I got to be a real trooper, which is something we haven't seen on screen in 30 years, that kind of idea. It's as time goes on, it starts to become meaning less and less. It'll be less a thing an actor might go, an established actor might go would take a role, or I don't know what the pay, obviously I don't know what the pay scale for these kind of things are, but before, when Episode 1 came out, it was everybody wanted to be in those movies, but by the time the third one came out, Gary Oldman famously actually was originally supposed to be the voice of General Grievous, and he walked away from that mainly because of a union thing. He didn't realize that it was a non-union production, but he walked away from it or whatever. It's like it thought, well, by the third movie, it had a little less cachet. And so it's like, instead of trying to like, well, let's work something out, he was just like, nah, it's all right. It's like, why make myself look bad to fellow actors by kind of, this movie? It's like the third movie of an unpopular trilogy. And I not that I think that Star Wars is going to all of a sudden get bad. I guess my point is like, it'll be less of a thing where it's like,
Right. Well, if we have one every year.
Yeah.
As you said, then maybe they stop being special.
Yeah, and going into the Han Solo thing, it's almost the idea where you see that they're starting to cast people that are already known actors, generally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas Star Wars kind of was like, Lucas had always said, I like to have, a couple known actors, but then I generally like to have young actors, or kind of not necessarily unproven, but ones that haven't already kind of done their definitive roles, and now they're in Star Wars. It usually be the thing where it would be a young actor, and this would be their definitive role. I don't know even know if I'm explaining this, but I guess the big takeaway this week is that Michael K. Williams is joining the already very heavy, full, I guess is the word, Han Solo movie cast.
Yeah.
Which, I like him. It's, obviously, loved him on The Wire. I'll be honest, I have seen him pop up, I saw him on Boardwalk Empire and whatnot, but yeah, generally I haven't, RoboCop, the RoboCop he was in, it's like, that was not a very good movie.
The new RoboCop, yeah.
Yeah, it's not but that's not his fault.
Yeah. So for people who have not, or don't recognize the name just right off the bat, The Wire is where, like, every article that covered this was like, oh, Michael K. Williams from The Wire. So that's where a lot of people know him, but he was also on Boardwalk Empire. He was in the movie 12 Years a Slave. He was in The Road, Inherent Vice, the new RoboCop that Robert alluded to. He did that The Night Of, I guess that was a miniseries, which Riz Ahmed also was in. He did a few episodes of Alias, so he has some Star Wars connections. But he's also done comedy, so those are all kind of dramatic roles. He was also apparently in an episode or a handful of episodes of Community. He was in the Chris Rock movie, I Think I Love My Wife. He was in the new Ghostbusters. He played a cop in the new Ghostbusters. He did an episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force. He did an episode or a sketch of Human Giant, the MTV version of the show. And what's interesting about that to me is, we talked about Tandy Newton whenever Tandy Newton was announced, and kind of her versatility and the pretty broad swath of movies she's been in. And it seems like this Han Solo cast is going for, or you're seeing actors with a little more of that versatility, right? So Michael K. Williams, Woody Harrelson obviously has, he was on both Cheers and True Detective, if you want to, be, and different ends of the spectrum, and Kingpin, but, and various other dramatic roles. What's his name? Alden Ehrenreich hasn't done a whole lot, but he's done a few different things that call on both his dramatic and comedic sides. Donald Glover, mostly known for comedy with Community and I guess Mystery Team. Atlanta is a comedy show.
Oh, I didn't know. Is that so? Atlanta is a comedy.
It is. It's a comedy show that also has serious moments to it. But I think, I haven't started watching it yet, but all of the comments on it I've seen are about how hilarious it is.
Okay.
But I think he is starting to take more dramatic roles in movies and things now. So, compare, and I was comparing that to, say, the Rogue One movie, where pretty much everyone of note, predominantly had dramatic backgrounds. Riz Ahmed was in Four Lions, which is, very kind of dark comedy. Donnie Yen he himself can be funny, and he had just a cameo in a movie that was like, it was a pretty funny cameo, but most of his movies, they're action movies. He's playing serious characters. You don't think of him as like a comedic actor, at least in the US. You probably don't, even though, he has those chops. But, pretty much everyone else, they're kind of known for their dramatic stuff. And so I just wonder if, and I would guess also that since it's, Chris Lord and
Phil.
Wait, is it Chris Miller and Phil Lord?
That's it.
Okay.
Chris Miller, Phil Lord, yeah.
I'll just say Lord and Miller. That's it kind of fits with who's running this movie, right? That you have the cast who can kind of do serious stuff and comedy, and maybe that's a tip off of what the movie's like. You also have Larry Kasdan and John Kasdan writing it. I don't Larry Kasdan can write kind of Star Wars humor. The question is like how much of this is just like comedy or humorous stuff, not necessarily within the confines of like a Star Wars setting.
Right.
So just noting the more versatile kind of acting backgrounds and resumes that the Han Solo movie cast has compared to the Rogue One cast, I thought it just kind of struck me.
Yeah, I'll be honest. It's like for this being the movie that's the great unknown. It's my own kind of not being an Emilia Clarke fan. This has got a really good cast. I mean, she could probably surprise. I mean, she's not terrible. I just really didn't like her in The Terminator, and I don't really think her character in Game of Thrones has a lot of opportunities for variety. She's mostly just standing and talking. So, I shouldn't be picking on her like I do, but it's like, wow, like, it's that kind of thing where it is that kind of thing where it's like they're going with the more known, but not necessarily like, Michael K. Williams, like everybody knows him as Omar, but he's obviously much more, like you said, much more versatile kind of thing. He might not necessarily, people are like immediately assuming that he's the bad guy, or maybe they actually kind of let it slip that he was playing the villain. I don't know, but although Rogue One had a lot of good actors, but I guess maybe I just feel a lot more comfortable with I've consumed more of the work of these people. I love The Wire. It's like that's one of those shows that when you finish it, I just go, it's like The Sopranos. Like I could just turn around and watch it over again. And he's good on. Boardwalk Empire is never been that essential, but it's still a good show. And his character is actually one of the more interesting characters. Although I haven't finished that entire run, so I don't know how much of it he's in later ones. But yeah, it's like there's a lot of great acting talent in this movie. I hope it kind of makes me hope it's not just some goofy heist movie, that it's a lot of like kind of wink, wink, nod, nod kind of, it's not like, did you ever see the movie Serenity?
No.
So Serenity was
not even sure I know what movie you're talking about.
So
the
Firefly movie, which was
which
was the movie that they made, like for the TV show that nobody watched, and then they spent a bunch of money. It's like, that was an okay movie. Although, when I revisit it, I kind of think to myself, this didn't age well. I'm kind of like hoping, that it's not going to be like, it's not going to look like a cross between that and Wild Wild West, I just keep on when they keep saying space western, or have they say western? Have they used western, or do they use heist, or do they use both? Like when people talking, but we're getting to the point where there's so many of these movies in production, I never know exactly which one they're referring to.
I've heard both. So Kathleen Kennedy has used both words, both heist. This move's closer to a heist or western type feel. We've talked about Frederick Remington and those primary colors that are used in his paintings defining the look and feel of the film. This is Kathleen Kennedy from an article in Variety 3.5 months ago.
Yeah.
So,
well, we obviously, see, that's the one thing where it's like, there's nothing more than, that can kind of make you nervous that like, like we're reinventing the Western. Although, in some ways, now that I just said this, I'm going to contradict myself. Lawrence Kasdan, if anybody could emulate that, would be Lawrence Kasdan, because he essentially kind of is responsible for a minor resurgence in the Western in the 80s with Silverado, which is which I haven't seen in forever, but I remember as a kid really enjoying that movie. And he was able to kind of take a genre at the time that I thought was pretty tired and not something I enjoyed and make it interesting. So, obviously they're not, I shouldn't say obviously, but, there could be, horses or not, or whatever, load-bearing animals or whatever the Star Wars wants to come up with. So it's like, it's that whole, but again, it does give me pause. That's like when they say, oh, it's going to emulate a West. It's kind of like when someone says, oh yeah, it's like a horror comedy. And you're like, oh geez, there's nothing I hate worse than a horror comedy, when it's like, let's take this, fear and laughter and mix them together. It's
So you're not going to go see Get Out then?
Is it a comedy?
I've heard it's like a dark comedy.
I mean, I'll rent it. I'm interested. It's been, everybody's talking about it, so I definitely want to see it on video. But yeah, it's like the whole thing. It's like I never really had a problem with it until somebody like kind of pointed out like the problems like when you cross the genres. And now when I think, it's like that thing when you kind of ruined Godzilla for me.
Yeah.
Not to say that I'm not to say that I'm weak-willed when it comes to art. It's just like if someone makes a good point and I start to ruminate on it for a long time, I can't help but like consider that opinion when I'm consuming. It's like I would say the best example of that is somebody had kind of said like how much they hated the movie Army of Darkness. Mm-hmm. How it was a betrayal of everything that was great about The Evil Dead to the umpteenth. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, when I watched it, every time I watch it now, I go, this is really crappy. It's like, it's not a good horror movie and it's not a good comedy. It's like, you can't really, cross-genre stuff has always been kind of risky.
Yeah.
But when they say that, who even knows what that means? They're just trying to give people a rough idea of what to expect. It's like, if they mean that the Han Solo movie is going to occur in like semi-rural areas, that wouldn't necessarily be out of step with most Star Wars movies, where it's like, the original trilogy, except when they go to Cloud City, they never go to any, or Mos Eisley, they're never in any major population centers. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like, Star Wars kind of does sometimes occur and happens in the margins of the galaxy. So, whatever. I guess I shouldn't look for problems where they're not there.
Yeah. Well, you say that. It turns out one of the locations where the Han Solo movie will be filming is Fuerteventura. This is one of the Spanish Canary Islands off the northern coast of Africa. It's a big tourist destination known for its white sand beaches and emerald waters. So we joked a while back, or I made the comment that they seem to be filming at a lot of UNESCO World Heritage sites. This is not one, but it is home to several eco parks. There's something called the Coralejo Dunes, which are apparently very beautiful and very, very nice. So maybe we're getting another beach planet or another sand planet. I'm sure it's going to look great, but when you think of the white sand beaches and the emerald waters, and then hearing again, we may have talked about it when it first came up, but hearing again just now, Kathleen Kennedy talking about Frederick Remington and those kind of primary colors to depict the West. I mean, that seems like it would fit. I mean, Frederick Remington didn't paint a lot of water, but so that is we're going to see Fuerteventura on the big screen in whatever the Han Solo movie is called. So look for that.
Exactly. I just Googled like to see what it looked like, and it's just a lot. Like the first image is some like naked dude. So be forewarned, people, if you're gonna Google.
Have your Google image filters.
Exactly. I just saw some guy's butt cheek, but it's
also a favorite subject of Frederick Remington.
Yeah, he was known as the butt cheek interpreter.
Yeah.
Although, what is this? I'm looking at another. So you've seen the white sand beaches, but I'm also seeing a picture with a kind of like palm trees and some stone buildings and stuff like that, and some high vistas and mountains. So, it looks very kind of has that kind of almost spaghetti Western kind of feel. But again, locations are merely just, another piece of the puzzle. It's like the Maldives is beautiful and exotic. It is. It in some ways it didn't feel like it actually got its featured as much as the production photos would have you know, with the idea of the stormtroopers and the the shots of the action. Oh, speaking of that, I was just reading something and it was, oh God, what was it? It was like an older piece of thing where they, it was Cine. Oh God, what's the name of the magazine? It's the expensive special effects magazine, Cinefantastique, I think, or Cinema. I don't know. I blanked on the name. Anyway, you go to Barnes and Noble and it's the one that's kind of a horizontal magazine, and it has Tarkin's on the cover this month, and I didn't buy it because it's like $14 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I did kind of go through it, and I did find a really interesting tidbit about maybe a kind of a clue about how the Rogue One was originally going to go. I mean, I think a lot of people talk about that Cassian and K2SO were supposed to kind of die at the door of a bunker. But it's a picture. They show a picture of Cassian from one of the original trailers, and it had to do with something to do with. They mentioned that it was his job to create a diversion by creating kind of a minefield for the AT-ACs that were approaching. So, just as a quick aside, I think there was another clue as to how maybe the story was constructed before the reshoots, that maybe Cassian was not there to back up Jyn necessarily. It was more of he was part of the diversion squad that a lot of the other characters became in the reshoot. So just another little clue. I could be wrong. It's just like, who knows when they write those magazines.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to,
but yeah, to your point about the Maldives and Scarif, they are shooting these in a limited area. They're not going all over Fuerteventura, and they're not, doing helicopter shots of the entire island. Well, as far as we know, anyway. They're probably not going to show all of the hotels and tourist sites, but they're going to be showing, location scouting. They look for parts of real places that can be made to look like other things. Right. So, whether we get the beach side, whether we get, these kind of mountains or hills, and the rockier parts of the island, or the the water, the emerald waters, if that's what they're going for, we'll see. But we're not going to get all of it, and once they plop Star Wars-y things into it, it's going to look different too. So,
right.
I don't know that. I knew that they had filmed in the Maldives, but watching Rogue One, I didn't spend the whole time thinking like, oh, they're just in the Maldives. I was like, oh wow, this looks really neat the way they did it, and they, you stick the front of a bunker there to you believe like, oh yeah, there's a bunker there. So yeah, I mean, they'll be filming at Fuerteventura, but that's not to say that like it's going to be a tourism, a film, an advertisement for people to go to Fuerteventura.
Oh, but they will. They know.
I mean, they will. People will, because now it's on the Star Wars location tour. But beyond that,
you want to talk about Rebels this week?
Yeah, let's talk about Rebels. Let's get to this week's latest episode, Secret Cargo. So in this episode, the Ghost, but minus Kanan and I guess Rex. We're never told what Kanan is doing, I guess.
No.
Freddie Prinze was busy that week. I don't know. So the Ghost, it's Hera, Ezra, and Zeb, basically, because that's the Ghost crew now, and Chopper. They're hiding out amongst some space junk They're, attached to the side of an old Clone Wars era ship floating through space, waiting to rendezvous with a ship carrying a secret cargo. They're there to help the ship refuel. One of those Imperial infiltrator droids shows up from previous episode this season, except this time it's flying its own ship. Why the infiltrator droid needs to use the sensors built into the droid itself rather than like the ship sensors. There's like a weird thing where like the droid is flying the ship and is using its own sensors. But if that's the case, like why can't they build the whole ship out of the infiltrator droid? Right. So the infiltrator droid shows up and spots them. They destroy it before it gets away. But at that point, it's probably transmitted their location. Gold Squadron shows up just as they blow it up. Gold Squadron is who they're there to help refuel. There's a bunch of Y-Wings plus a transport. The pilots of the Y-Wings won't allow anyone from the Ghost onto the transport, so they're like, all right, we'll come over to the Ghost and we'll chat there. They start refueling, and then sure enough, more Imperials show up, having been brought to that location by the infiltrator droid. So they're trying to refuel, they're trying to scramble. The Imperials keep shooting at the transport. The connector between the ships gets broken so that they can't detach. It gets to the point where they have to evacuate the transport, and it turns out the secret cargo that they're carrying is Senator Mon Mothma. And I refer to her as Senator Mon Mothma because that's all anyone calls her in this episode, even when they're like talking to her. So Hera will say like, Senator Mon Mothma. It's nice to see you. Well, Senator Mon Mothma, which is bad writing. I'll just cut to the chase. It's bad writing. I mean, I guess it's been confirmed that Mon is her first name, right? It's not like a title. So her name is Mon Mothma. She is Senator Mon Mothma. But like, if you think of in the real world, when people are talking to, say, John McCain, they don't just keep calling him Senator John McCain. They don't go, well, Senator John McCain, what do you think about this? They just call him like Senator McCain. So I don't know why they didn't just write, okay, you give them the first reference, Senator Mon Mothma, and then from then everyone goes like, well, Senator Mothma. Maybe that sounds weird to say, Senator Mothma. I don't know, but
Senator Mothma.
Yeah. We need, what Rebels really needs is tiny twins who sing and bring Mon Mothma to wherever they need her to be.
And it needs anyway, Star Wars needs John McCain. Trust me.
That's right. So who would the John McCain? Anyway, I don't want to get into it.
General Riken or something like that.
Yeah, maybe. So Mon Mothma gets evacuated to the Ghost. Ezra ends up piloting one of the Y-Wings. It was never clear to me. I've watched it a couple times. It was never clear to me, like, why? Like, they had enough pilots. They had enough Y-Wing pilots. But they're just like, oh, do you mind if Ezra flies one of these things? And they're like, yeah, go for it. So anyway, Ezra ends up piloting one of the Y-Wings. The rebels all manage to jump to light speed and get away. Then you see Thrawn, kind of being informed of what happened. He correctly surmises that Hera is going to take them all through the Archeon Nebula because capital ships can't really follow them through that nebula, even though it's dangerous. They can't really be followed by a Star Destroyer. So he sends the TIE Defender prototype that was hinted at, or that we saw again earlier this season, several months ago now. So the TIE Defender and I guess a couple of interceptors, also show up. He sends them, and after the Ghosts. Meanwhile, Governor Price is she was like, I want to get in on this, and so she takes some Star Destroyers to the far end of the nebula to catch them if they should be able to get through. So the Defender, shows up. The other Y-Wing pilots of Gold Squadron don't really know what it is. Ezra's like, oh, I recognize the ship, and then gives like a complete technical readout of it has hyperdrive and heavy shields and heavy laser cannons. So the TIE Defender succeeds in destroying, I think, 4 of the 6 Y-Wings. The Ghost escapes. Ezra and Gold Leader are able to disable the TIE Defender with their ion cannons. But then when they get out to the other side of the nebula, the Star Destroyers are there. They start pulling the Ghost into a tractor beam. Ezra and Gold Leader then, and I keep saying Gold Leader because that's all they call him in this episode. I think we get his name.
His name is John Dutch Vander.
That's right. But no one ever calls him that. They just call him Gold Leader, like Senator Mon Mothma. So they fire their proton torpedoes into the nebula, which causes these flares. And of course, the Star Destroyers are positioned in such a way that these flares then kind of burn up the side of the Star Destroyers, destroying their systems, destroying the tractor beam. So they all jump once again and go to Dantooine. So earlier in this episode, we had seen on, I guess, the Imperial HoloNet, Mon Mothma delivering her speech where she, calls the Emperor, treasonous and talks about a massacre. That reference comes from an earlier role-playing game that, Paulo Hidalgo brought into it, or someone brought into it. So at the end, they go to Dantooine. Mon Mothma gives a speech. This is kind of the rendezvous point that has been kind of secretly, whispered about, of maybe all of these rebel cells around the galaxy joining together. And so she gives her speech about how, they must stand and fight. She officially resigns from the Senate, and asking others to join her. And so it takes a couple seconds, but then a whole bunch of ships show up. A lot of ships that you may recognize from Rogue One, including the Hammerheads that were originally seen, I guess, Clone Wars technically, but then they were in Season 2 of Rebels. What else shows up? There's some, transport ship or, hangar ship that, Imperial ship that the Rebels captured in a previous episode from last season, I think. That shows up as well. And so this episode really marks the beginning of the Alliance part of the Rebel Alliance. Overall, I thought the episode was kind of slow. There's actually a lot that happens. You say, a lot have, first they pick up on Mothma, and then the Empire shows up, and there's this droid, and they go through a nebula, and the TIE Defender shows up, and they have to deal with the TIE Defender, and there's a tractor beam, and they have to deal with this nebula, and then Mon Mothma gives a speech, and then, So there's a lot of points to hit. There are a lot of beats to hit, but just the pacing of it was kind of leisurely, we'll say. The ending too, we can talk about this, I guess, a little bit, is I wonder if it was kind of underplayed. This episode felt like it was the middle of a story rather than have its own beginning, middle, and end, which they've done episodes like that before, and that's certainly how the Clone Wars was structured a lot of times. But I just feel like if you're going to have such a momentous thing happen, this is the Rebel Alliance coming together and agreeing to be an alliance kind of for the first time, maybe that should have been the season finale. We'll see what we get with the season finale. And maybe that's a bigger moment too. But, for what it is, and on Rebels Recon, Filoni and other people who work on the show is no, this is a really big moment for the rebellion. It's I feel like it kind of got underplayed with this episode. But what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of it just felt like they were trying to have all this gravitas, but then they kind of just cut it all. It just something. The writing was strange in this episode. The whole subterfuge, but the whole idea that they were trying to hold off that it was Mon Mothma for so long the payoff wasn't, unless you were really steeped in Star Wars lore. I think it might have been what do we care here? It's obviously right. You've seen Rogue One or as if Mon Mothma ever appeared on Rebels.
No, I don't believe so. I think this is her first appearance on
Yeah,
this.
so they got Genevieve.
They certainly were marketing it as such. And she was voiced by Genevieve O'Reilly, who did.
Which is kind of like, that's cool. I like the continuity of that. That's a good thing. It does kind of make me bummed out that Gold Leader, that they didn't bother to get Angus McInnes to come back and maybe do the dialogue for it. I mean, he's still a working actor. I think he's been on. I looked this up just to make sure that wasn't him, but he's on that show Vikings sometimes, but he's still, and he kind of somebody interviewed him recently about, him popping up in Rogue One, and he kind of jokingly said, "Oh yeah, they gave me a whole bunch of money to do it." I mean, obviously they used footage that they'd paid him for 40 years ago, so he didn't receive any compensation for being resurrected aside from a residual or whatever. I don't even know what that would be. It would have been a nice continuity to have, since they made such a big deal of having him and having it be his, a depiction that looks pretty close to him in A New Hope, to not have him come and do the voice, but whatever. It was kind of like this strange halting episode with a big ending where you're like, oh, this is what this is all about. It did have a kind of a, they could have done it in a way that would really have built up the idea, especially since, which we didn't mention, is that it's official that Rebels is coming back for a fourth season.
Yep.
So maybe that's kind of, maybe they don't even really realize, like, well, if that, if this is a big deal, then what is the fourth season? Now that the Rebels have come together, isn't that going to be the really important thing? But little stuff like, so, they're, all about protecting Mon Mothma and all this stuff. But then, like, they leave her right by the airlock to kind of like pull on that lever for like 3 minutes. And it's kind of like, what? There's not anybody else on that ship that could do that. I mean, she's an important person. They should probably be having her in a safe part of the ship, not right next to the back door. And when they're in battle, maybe I'm being a little too nitpicky.
I mean, I think it was meant to show, like, she's not afraid of rolling up her sleeves and pitching in for the cause. Like, that's kind of what I saw it as. But you're right. It again, like, the pacing of this episode, it went on too long. Like, she didn't have to. They kept trying to build suspense, I guess, of, are they going to escape from the Empire in time? Are they going to get through the nebula? Like, is the ghost going to get captured by the Star Destroyer? But, like, no, we know. I mean, maybe children watching the episode weren't sure, but, like, if you're an adult watching this thing, like, they're going to get out of it. This show has not yet.
Well, and they
done
also
the thing where, like, they don't escape.
Right?
Like, if someone doesn't escape, it's because they choose not to escape, like with Callus last week.
Right.
So, like, they're going to get away. They're going to get to Dantooine. They're going to create the Rebel Alliance. Just the pacing of it, I thought, really kind of, it made it feel like a smaller moment than it actually was.
And they also stole a big plot point from a Star Trek movie, which is this whole nebula that you can ignite and stuff like, which I think is a subplot of Star Trek Insurrection, which actually is not even regarded as a particularly well-made Star Trek movie. It's the one where during the battle, like, Riker pushes a button and literally a joystick comes out of the floor because the battle is so boring that they had to like make it more impressive of this guy flying the ship with a joystick. It's kind of like, oh boy, to be honest, that's such a sci-fi trope that let's go hide in the nebula. Everybody's like hiding in the nebula. I mean, I will say this, there's some kind of cool effects, because I don't know if it's the nebula itself or there's some close where there's a lot of like heat and it causes like the ship's plating to come
there's a
off.
Star in the middle of the nebula or something, right? And so their idea for getting the TIE Defender off their backs is, Hera's going to fly closer to the star to, shake the Imperials, and it works. And I agree. The nebula looked really good, and that sequence was really good. It just, the rest of it was just kind of slow, and the dialogue, there would be, you could drive the cliche or the old saws, right? The dialogue that you could drive a truck through, the pauses in between, and like I felt like there were moments like that where, and I felt this way with Rebels before too, like the editing of it or the timing of it or something as such, where like something will happen and you would want like a quick reaction to it, but then it's like another second before someone says anything, and it's like they're coming in too fast, but it's not really said with as much urgency as there should be. So, like there are some of those moments in this episode, but the nebula itself, the way it was rendered, the way it was done, I thought it looked really, really good.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of pacing and then kind of, like them trying to play up to fans, but then not really going that extra mile, or maybe they took it a little for granted that people would consider this to be important if they watched it. I mean, I think it would have been kind of cool if at the end they had, like, when all the ships showed up, that large Mon Cal cruiser showed up or something, and it was like, they could have Stanton come on and go like, General, Admiral Raddus here or something. And I think that would have been kind of a nice way to, kind of tie it all together into the Rogue One of it, kind of, because it is.
And the ships were so far away too. Like you could make out what they were, but like they were so far away. It's like, oh, they're still all the way over there, and then they just show up and it's like silent.
Yeah,
like they came, like they arrived, and then the episode ends, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and again, it's the whole idea that we're supposed to go, oh, it's Mon Mothma, like that. What did she do? I mean, as far as
Senator Mon Mothma,
yeah, exactly.
It's like it's like on an old 80s TV show or something where like Mr. T shows up and they're like, Mr. T, like, that's right, kids, I'm here to tell you to stay in school and take, whatever. It's like it was the same thing when she walked in. It was like Senator Mon Mothma.
I guess the thing is her cachet is that she's the one that basically calls out the emperor for being an emperor. It's kind of like,
right.
I don't know,
a self-proclaimed emperor.
Well, maybe that's because it's like, every time we always think of, like, historically when you watch TV, when somebody declares themselves emperor, that usually means they're a despot. So it's kind of like, oh, you just figured out that, it's been 20 years. You were already kind of, in the deleted scenes from Revenge of the Sith, she had already kind of called BS on Palpatine, during the end of the Clone Wars. Obviously that's not part of the movie because those scenes have been deleted, but maybe it would have been a little bit more, trying to like maybe build it up a little bit, kind of, make it kind of more of like kind of showing what she risked. I mean, obviously we know she's in peril because if they get her, she's in trouble. I don't know, maybe just the kind of, and maybe they sold it just right and I'm asking for a little too much. That kind of, it would have been an interesting way to kind of maybe expand the character and this thing. Oh, maybe in some ways that she's kind of like the prototypical, kind of like what Princess Leia becomes later. It's like, well, they kind of did show it in her episode, which I forget the name of it. But the idea that she kind of lived two lives of a warrior and a senator, that kind of the dichotomy that, the time for talking is over or whatever. I mean, maybe I'm asking for too much for that. I just felt like that's the kind of,
yeah, she's like, oh, I've left this, I resigned from the Senate. And then we don't, I mean, maybe in the future we'll see the consequences, but we're not going to see them anytime soon because next week's episode is a Chopper focused episode. And then after that we have Obi-Wan versus Maul. And then after that we have the season 2 finale. So maybe that story is something that's going to be told elsewhere, kind of the Mon Mothma story is yet to be told, and Rebels isn't the right outlet for it. But you're right. If they're going to make such a big thing of this moment, at least within the confines of this episode, it didn't really feel as significant or as consequential as it could have and maybe will in the future once we get all this backstory elsewhere.
Well, yeah, and I guess, and to be fair, that, you know, even in the EU, that I felt like that, except for, except for it was one of the decent parts of Kevin J. Anderson's much maligned Jedi Academy trilogy was the fact that she actually was her character. I think, well, actually, she kind of got sidelined with a illness. Like Imperial threw a drink on her face that was a virus in it. She's always been like one of these characters like this. People have never quite known what to do with her. Mm-hmm. It's like even in the EU, it was always like she was almost talked about more than she appears. It's like when she would show up, she would just kind of show up in her gown and she would sit there and go blah 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 blah, and then, you know, she's very stiff, and then
she would delegate to Leia, and then Leia would go do a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she has it's the thing, I don't think she carries a gun, you know, it's like, I don't think she's ever actually been in a battle. I think she's more of a figurehead. And I think maybe it might be hard for when it's Star Wars and it's a lot of battle, and you've got, you know, what I considered to be, you know, a very special episode for like Sabine, you know, kind of, you know, even though I kind of didn't like the fact that she demurred about the Darksaber or whatever, but, you know, I think it was still kind of interesting to have this, you know, to have this character who's like kind of like the nexus of the rebellion, to not really, you know, again, I say you could even argue in a lot of ways Rogue One didn't do much in any way to kind of expand the character, you know. Maybe I'm just criticizing the whole way the character's handled. I mean, it would have been cool. Yeah. Because if you think about Rogue One,
she has a slightly larger role. I will say she has a slightly larger role as a character in the third Aftermath book, okay. Empire's End.
Okay.
But you're right. But I mean, and then for that reason, like, that was kind of one of the things I liked, was like, oh, we get to see Mon Mothma like sort of doing things, or at least we get some stuff kind of from her perspective, and we get a little more insight as to how she deals with things. But because you're right, like, you know, we just haven't really seen that a lot. She's been kind of sidelined so that Leia can be the one in charge, or at least in the EU, that's kind of how it went.
Yeah, and even in Rogue One, and it's like, the more I think about Rogue One, and I only saw it 3 times in the theater, but we've got, you know, it's coming out on video in like 2 weeks, but it would have been it was great that they brought her back even after her scenes had been deleted. So that was a nice continuity there, but it's like, it kind of makes you wonder, it's like, maybe she needed a little bit more to do in this movie, you know, like when Jyn kind of like decides that she wants to take the Empire on head on, it happens kind of like this. I never quite figure out what the switch that kind of goes off in her head that she thinks that she can get personally involved in this. Would have been kind of cool if maybe Mon Mothma they'd had a scene together where, you know, she kind of said, you know, hey, I lived on Chandrilla, and then, you know, I watched the Imperials shoot a bunch of people for stealing food or something like that, and I realized that, you know, blah blah blah, and it could have been like the thing where she goes, you know, where there's because they talk about this idea that somehow, you know, Jyn has to be convinced or something, but, you know, there's not really an effective kind of turnover, you know, and people that are critical of Rogue One have said how kind of thinly the characters are drawn in the movie, and I would say that, you know, a little sequence like that could have had repercussions that could have gone through, you know, could have been great in Rebels. She could have been the rallying. Instead, it's like, it's her name, and it's, you know, it's like, okay, Mon Mothma, and you just keep, it's like that thing where it's like everybody shows up, and, you know, people always, I don't even know how to say this. It's kind of like, I always think it's like, but the best example of what I'm trying to get across is like the idea of like, what's this, like Warren Beatty, like the actor Warren Beatty, like when they when they bring him out to the Oscars, it's like, it's supposed to mean a whole bunch of things to people, but like I grew up and I'm just young enough to have never really known anything about Warren Beatty. And so every time he comes up, it's like, Warren Beatty. And I'm thinking to myself, who cares? And it's only, and it's mainly,
the guy who had sex with a lot of people.
yeah, he had a lot of sex, and now he's like, he made like that Dick Tracy movie or whatever.
Right.
But it's like that thing where it's like, yeah, I think one of the mistakes that sometimes Star Wars makes when they do these is that they allow the fact that like, oh, I've seen that figure, and oh, they were in this Return of the Jedi already. They let the fact that they were already in other stuff kind of do the heavy lifting, whereas narratively it's like, I mean, I think that would be the problem with the prequels too. It's like they let a lot of these things, just the fact of what their name is, do a lot of this heavy lifting, when it's like,
right.
If you had a little 2-minute conversation, you could have actually elevated this, where it's like, again, back to being Mon Mothma, they'd have this conversation, and then when she shows up on Rebels, we already know that, like, oh, this is a personal thing for her. She had to make a big decision to, step away from being a senator or whatever. Instead it's just like, well, you remember her from Jedi, right? And she was in, Rogue One, and she's the senator, so we've just got to assume she's great. Whereas, I feel like a little bit more subtlety and a little bit more explanation would have taken something that was decent and made it something special. That's just, as a person who, had at different times in his life has fancied himself as a writer, at least if I was somebody asked me to read this and critique it, that's what I would say. So that's just my opinion.
No, I mean, it's, you're right. She always has been an underdeveloped character, and we talked about Rogue One enough, but yeah, I think I was one of those people who had that concern or that critique that, like, yeah, some of these characters, they just kind of say who they are, but we don't actually see that. We just get a line of dialogue saying, oh, I'm the pilot and I can make things right, but without ever learning what that means. And Mon Mothma fits into that too in that movie. And so, yeah, like I said, I can't imagine this is the end of the Mon Mothma story and backstory that we get. I would bet that, maybe we get a little more of it. I mean, it could be that they decide it's better to keep her background a little more mysterious, or that they don't think she's that interesting a character, because then you have to get too much into like the politics and the political side, and maybe that they're worried about diving too much into, how the Imperial Senate works again.
Exactly.
At least for right now. But yeah, I agree. She's a character I think that the whole story, the whole Star Wars business that they're doing could probably benefit from her, just that character being fleshed out a little more.
Yeah, it's, again, it's always a balance, because I would even say to, like, you commented at like, why did Ezra just hop in a Y-wing? And, at first I was like, there's putting Ezra up front even when he doesn't belong. But then I realized, well, that kind of goes into the idea that, like, why did they let, some farm boy from Tatooine jump into one of their X-Wings, at the end of A New Hope. So it's like, that's kind of that's like a Star Wars trope. They throw kids in these ships all the time, and it's kind of like, that doesn't really make sense. But yeah, it's, maybe I'm asking for too much. And yeah, again, it can sometimes open up uncomfortable, even though it's like, some of the speech was like, it kind of felt like, at first, when she started giving her speech, I was like, is this kind of tied in? Are they sending kind of a message? But then it became more of an amorphous kind of commentary. So yeah, I'm sure that they're kind of like the temptation to insert, stuff about, the politics of Star Wars is probably there, but yeah, it's probably in some ways it's best they just sidestep it. But so, did you see anything like the preview of what this Chopper episode's going to be about, or do we? A
little bit. So I mean, I don't want to spoil the episode, but yeah, it seems like Chopper and the Alan Rickman droid, or maybe just Chopper, I don't know, try to infiltrate some Imperial base, gets recognized, and then it's called Double Agent Droid is the name of the episode, so I'll just leave it at that. So it's that sort of thing. That's just based on the clip they show at the end of Rebels Recon, and then they usually post a second clip a couple days later, that's previewing the next episode. So it's kind of I think it's about that, and I imagine Thrawn is closing in on them. He's narrowed down the planets where their base could be even further. So that I think it's probably about moving that story along a little bit.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I wonder. I kind of wonder if this Maul Obi-Wan face-off is going to be kind of possibly underwhelming.
I don't understand how it ties into any of the rest of it. Maybe we'll find out later on, and all of that. But it's like they've, now in the first half of the season, Thrawn wasn't around much, and now that is kind of the main thrust of the second half of this season. And so now to leave that and go back to like, oh, and hey, remember the Maul thing? It just seems, it just seems out of sync or kind of disorienting almost.
Yeah, and again, talking about like the way that Rebels uses characters, it's like I've never been particularly happy how they've handled Lando, but it's like, okay, well, in the grand scheme of Star Wars, Lando he's kind of in the secondary ring of characters, so it's kind of like, okay, you can play around with that character a bit more. But then, like, when Leia was done, when they did the Leia episode, it's like, it was like, well, that's kind of an odd way to introduce a major Star Wars character. And in some ways, adding, old Obi-Wan, which in some ways is a different character than the Clone Wars Obi-Wan. It's like he's in a different place. It's kind of, the way it doesn't give me a lot of hope that they're going to necessarily give it the gravitas that it needs. And again, it might be one of I honestly feel like it's kind of going to be a bit of a letdown, that there's not going to be, that people are expecting this big battle. I bet you anything it's probably going to be pretty talky, and that they're just going to they're probably not even going to really fight. That's my I think it's like going to be like one of these things where they're going to have a conversation, and not that they have to hack and slash their way through it, but in a lot of ways, they're building this idea that it's going to be a television version of this Infinities comic that people have, I think I've mentioned before about like these, they did a series of a lot of different versions, like little one-off stories that were not considered canon. Maybe that's not the Infinity, it's Visionaries. Infinities was a comic series they did, like, what if Han Solo didn't come back and the Yavin got destroyed or something, or Luke, what if Luke had died on Hoth or something. I don't remember how it goes, but anyway, it's the Visionaries one. It's like, it's Maul showing up to attack, either he wants to kill Obi-Wan or he wants to kill Luke Skywalker. I can't remember. Anyway, I think a lot of, well, I know it's been a while. It's been about 10 years since I read it, but I think a lot of people are expecting that episode to be this, and I don't think that's what they're going to go for. Because I think they kind of, in some ways, they probably have to go opposite expectations. So that's why I'm thinking it's going to be more, it's going to be more talky than anything. But anyway, that's just me speculating. And I think we probably can wrap up for the week. Unless you have, okay.
That's a good place to do it.
Yeah. If you want to reach out and contact us with your takes, it's best way to do that. Hosts, HOSTS. No, yeah, that's right. I do this every week. Hosts. It's host with an S at talkingbirdcast.com. That's our email address. We are at talkingbirdcast on Twitter. We have a website. It's www.talkingbirdcast.com. We also have an Amazon affiliate link, and if you don't know how that works, basically if you go to www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon, it'll just take you through to Amazon, and what happens is any eligible purchases you make, it kicks back a percentage to us. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Amazon pays for it, and it's just a way to help support the show, keep the lights on, as they say. And we always thank you for doing that. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
So next week I likely will be. So I've read Aftermath, Empire's End. I'll probably end up talking about it next week. So if you specifically have anything you want to ask or you want to comment on with that book, drop us a line.
Yeah, definitely.
Email or Twitter. Comics, we may catch up on some comics depending on what else comes up. So, how do you think Dr. Aphra is going? What do you think of the Poe Dameron comic?
Exactly.
Send us your comments, your questions, and we'll talk about them on the show.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you and for Talking Birdcast. I have been Robert Zachary.
I remain John Llewellyn.
Again, thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you. Oh, yeah, you know what it should be? You know what Senator John McCain's Star Wars name would be?
What's that?
Senator Bomberan.
Yeah.
They'd just be like, Senator Bomberan,
yeah.
Bomberan. That's not funny.
Or they would just like mix it up. They would be like Senator Kane John Mick.